Okay. Am I loud enough, Matt? I know you just turned me down because I was too loud. Well, I think we've had a really productive day so far. I think that last session, there were so many more questions I think many of us wanted to ask, but the panelists will be here, obviously, for the next few days. So do keep the dialogue about the space of exhibitions going, and then, of course, that's going to weave into the time of exhibitions, which is a panel I'm moderating tomorrow morning with Sarah, who just made it, who was delayed but is now on the island, and Christopher, who we've heard so much from already, or via other people. And Tanya Barson, who's come all the way from Barcelona as well, so that's going to be pretty exciting. But we did think that, obviously, while you're on site at the National Gallery, most of you have not been here before. I know Holly has, Nicole has, and Amanda Coulson, who's late, but she's going to be joining us in a few minutes, I think, straight from the Bahamas. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to just give you a little bit of an overview about who we are and what we do. And it fits in quite well, actually, from the space of exhibitions, because one of the main takeaways that I had from all of the presenters, and I thought it was beautifully curated, for want of a better word, from the yard to the road to the biennial, was what happens next after that immediate kind of interactive performance in many cases, as Claire spoke about. And then with the biennial, what was left behind and what was the value for the community? So that really has run through the National Gallery's philosophy since we were initially conceived, which was in 1996, but formally in 1997, which is why we are celebrating our 20th anniversary. And we started off as literally a roving education program. And the founding director, Leslie Bigelman, who was a New York native that had lived in Cayman for many years at that point, an artist herself, connected to the then governor's wife, Carol Owen, got in a car and literally went from school to school to encourage arts education in the local school curriculum, because there was really none happening at all at that point. The visual arts in the formal sense in the Cayman Islands are really only about 50 years old. So, of course, like many other smaller Caribbean islands, it was really in the 60s, 70s, in many cases with independence. For us, really with this kind of banking boom and this transformation in our society, that this formal fine art scene began to grow. So it's very young. And because of that, wasn't at the time embraced as an authentic cultural pastime in Cayman by the local community. So we really had to do a lot of educating around why we were going to be necessary as a national museum for many years before we actually built this facility that we're standing in today. These are just some of the statistics about what we've done in the last 5 years since moving into the building, and then we're going to just look at lots of great photographs after this. So in 1997, we were established formally by the government. We're one of 3 major cultural organizations in the Cayman Islands. The other one is across the bush, the Cayman National Culture Foundation, who are primarily responsible for performing arts, dramatic arts, writing, heritage craft. We also have a national museum, which is very formally and traditionally a national museum of mainly objects. Some archaeology, very little art, but they were the first formal art collectors, so they do actually lend us work for our national collection display. The organizations really have a very unique focus, but there is engagement and obviously cross-collaboration between the two. But because of the gallery's unusual beginnings, we didn't have a national collection to start off, or we didn't inherit a private collection. We worked out of a facility that was about 2,000 square feet downtown in Georgetown in a rented shopping center. And we were there until 5 years ago. So because of that, it really drove our philosophy of education first, exhibitions second, and then the collection really has grown formally in the last 5 years. So since moving into the facility, which was 2012, for a small organization, this is the kind of work that we've been doing. And you'll see that education plays really, really centrally still in that. So the building itself, 9,000 square feet, was conceived in 1998. So almost straight after this idea that, once the energy had started about needing a national gallery, needing art education, they started talking about a gallery. But of course, and I'm going to quote Christopher again, because this has really come out of our conversations, this idea of a complex he mentioned in the region, this need of having these big museums to really solidify the reason and the sort of maturity of the arts. We were the flip side, total opposite, and it took us about 14 years of private fundraising because the government really didn't contribute financially to the building itself, although we're part government funded. about 14 years of begging and pleading and stopping and starting before we had the budget to actually kickstart and build. And I took over as director in 2009. I've kind of woven through the ranks at the gallery. I started as education officer and press officer, moved into curatorial positions, and then deputy, and now director. And kickstarted the capital campaign in 2009. The building took a couple of years and a bit more fundraising. We had another $1 million to raise just as we hit the recession. But that also brought construction to a more realistic price in Cayman, and we were able to actually form this facility that we're in today. So this has really been a bit of a game changer for us in many ways. It's helped kind of solidify our reputation, both literally physically, because you see us on the Hartwell bypass, which this is actually our entrance, but you can see the road is being redeveloped, and it will be again in about 2 months. So you can see us, we have a very physical presence now, and that really has been quite a game changer for many people in the community, and we're now welcoming about 20,000 people a year instead of 10 in the old space. So that complex has made a difference. At the same time, we're still incredibly keen to make sure that we're not confined, as O'Neill was talking about, the challenges, the physical confinement of suddenly being one of those traditional institutions. We do not want to then sort of fall into that habit of just functioning on our site. And that's really informing a very big 20th anniversary campaign that I'll get to at the end. And we were going to end this short presentation with a gallery tour, but because of timing, we're going to pop outside, take a group photograph while everyone is here. And then we're going to come straight back inside, and we have some micro presentations from a lot of the delegates, which are going to be really exciting, short and sharp, but really cool. So we'll get to that. So we'll do the tours when we mingle with the reception, because it's going to be possibly rainy, so we might be inside after all. So education and youth, about 50% of the gallery's resources, both staff and budget, are really still completely siphoned off to education in the very traditional sense. So we play the role of art school in the Cayman Islands. We don't have any other formal art education institution. We need one, but we're also a very small institution. So we're really interested in forming greater dialogue with Edna Manley, with the Barbados College, Bahamas. And if we're looking at the development of Caymanian art, it really is the lack of even tertiary level associate degree programs here that is kind of preventing that development happening at a more rapid pace. So for me personally, that's something I've been working on with the University College here to establish a program that will at least keep our students connected to the arts if they then want to go away and study at university. And we'll talk about our Creative Careers program at the National Gallery in a minute. So we do the major after-school programs. We do 7 after-school programs a week, starting with 5-year-olds, going all the way through to teens. And that's in all 3 islands. So when we're talking about space, for us, and just like the Bahamas, I know the National Gallery of Bahamas have been doing some really exciting projects in the outer islands. And of course, Jamaica going to National Gallery West. You know, really thinking about, as a national entity, are we really reaching all the people in the periphery of our own centre? Is very central to us. These are just some of the Carrie-Anne, who you've all met now, Kerwin Ebanks, a past education manager, and Jessica, who you can see. So we do about 2 or 3, well, actually about 3 or 4 school tours a week, and we realized very quickly that the school communities really don't have time for art. They're like, yeah, no, that's one of those fluffy subjects at the kind of end of this very old Victorian academic curriculum, which is very inside the box. And I think we struggle across the region really with this very old learning paradigm. So we realized we had to trick people into wanting to come here. So we now have this really exciting cross-curricular learning program that the Ministry of Education has engaged with us in. We are in the Ministry of Culture and Health. We've been in the Sports Ministry before. We're not in the Ministry of Education. We're hoping with the election next week that might change, because it makes no sense to me. But so we've had to work with the 2 ministries and make sure that education, the weight behind the Ministry of Education is really understanding what we do and why we're valuable. So the cross-curricular learning programs, which we'll get to in just a minute, these are just a few of our outreach programs. We have weekly classes that we go into both the female and male prison and this rehabilitation centre on a weekly basis for art outreach. These are the after-school clubs that I mentioned. Seniors programs that we do twice a month. And adult classes, because again, there are really no continuing education classes available for creativity, although that is changing with the establishment of a couple of new spaces like the Arts Nest and Visual Arts Society, which is a longer-running organisation. We're also very keen about establishing, and we mentioned this with Kerry's career through the gallery, creative career opportunities. So going into the school system, talking about design careers, fashion careers, film careers, visual arts scholarships. So we fund, with a big local bank who will not be mentioned because they've asked not to, every second year scholarship, fully paid undergraduate fine arts scholarship abroad. And we've currently funded 6 students, and I have a couple more. Simon Tatum, who I think many of you have met, has just graduated on one of those scholarships. And Kerry Ann also did a master's in museums, galleries and contemporary art in culture in London on one of those scholarships. And Paige Jordison, who is just inside the gallery right now, but is also back interning with us, is currently still working through her fine art, and I think it's studio art and arts management scholarship in the States. So those are a few of our really amazing young people that we've been collaborating with for a long time. The cross-curricular learning is important because what we do now is we go out to schools and we teach science, maths, social studies, all the, for us, we know art is already speaking this conversation, but we've had to change the dialogue with schools to put the science, the linguistics, the communication skills first, and then we just use our national collection to tell those stories. So it's a really easy flip, but it's actually made a remarkable difference in how the school system connect to and use the gallery. Obviously now, as we emerge into being a sort of a longer-running art institution museum, we have the National Collection, and we've had it for many years in bits, but we've really never had a collection development plan. And in the last 3 or 4 years, because my background is art history, and I trained in Glasgow, and I know there's some great Glasgow people here today. My first degree was at Glasgow Uni, which was in collaboration with the art school, is growing this collection. And again, lobbying government for funds to help collect works. You can imagine in a society like this where there is quite a lot of private funding and collecting, it's very hard to retain some of the key works that we need for the collection. So that's been a really exciting journey in the last few years for me personally and the team. And we now have a book on the collection that we're going to give out to all delegates. And if you do have institutional libraries, we ask that they kind of end up there or pass them on and share the story. So our collection is only about 250 pieces, but it is growing quite rapidly, and it really is allowing us to tell this remarkable story of the history of the Cayman Islands. That isn't just banking and tourism. This is our upstairs space, which we'll be viewing later on, a bit later than we planned, but tonight. This is the learning that we talked about. These are all the different collections-based learning initiatives that we currently have. And again, they've really opened up this kind of access to the organisation. Temporary exhibitions. So again, we have several hats. We've really evolved, I think, as a contemporary art space and education space first, and then, as I mentioned, this kind of formal National Institute second. In our old facility, the only room that we had was the exhibition space. So it was very interesting to hear about Alice Yard. I know, now through Tilting Access, we've formed a lot of partnerships with institutions, but also artist-led spaces, and to just see the creativity that goes into making your environment work, no matter what space you have to, literally to work with. So we have a rotation of 5 key exhibitions in the lower gallery annually. And then the space you're sitting in today was originally designed to have permanent seating. And I inherited the architectural plan before we actually built. And the building was yellow with blue-tinted glass walls. The internal gallery was just a big welcome center because we were ever going to be able to afford a space just to say hi to people. So that had to change. I put the walls in, we put the floor in, and we changed everything to grey and white. So, those were some of the simple changes, but that allows for this rotating space. But then we realized very quickly that we wanted to offer a professional contemporary art space for emerging artists and experimental shows. So this room really seconds as a gallery, and our next exhibition is going to be Simon Tatum, and with an exhibition, I think it's your graduate show, but also inspired by the Caribbean linked residency conversations, I believe. So that'll be really exciting. You'll be able to capture that online in the next couple of weeks. Just a couple of the exhibitions that we've done. Randy, I think who many of you have met, Davin Ebanks is the artist in the top corner. Davin's work is upstairs. He's a very interesting artist from Cayman. He's currently the head of glass at Kent State University. And Gordon Solomon, who is one of our Native Son Collective members in the lower left-hand for you guys side. This, you might recognize, is Charles Campbell from the En Masse exhibition. So our exhibition schedule has always been designed to invite collaboration and international shows. Being a very small island, obviously we don't run out of artwork, but we do want to make sure that we're bringing in connections from overseas so that our own community can have access if they can't travel abroad and see these artworks firsthand. So En Masse was a really exciting partnership for us, and that happened last year and then went on to the National Gallery of the Bahamas. And again, obviously I knew Holly and Amanda before Tilting Axis, but really it was dialogue that happened as a result of that looked at ways that we could collaborate on funding. There was no way we were able to bring this down to the Caribbean alone, and we were able to kind of share shipping costs and insurance costs, and even share some of the fabricated work that we created here and pass it on to the Bahamas. So those are models that we really want to continue talking about. Double slide, but this was actually some of the students from the local college, obviously using the John Beadle headdresses, and we got John's permission to make them in our workshop, as long as we shared the photos with him. So we were able to create the procession inside and actually use that as part of the educational program to have the students engage, because our carnival in Cayman is really a imported product in its entirety. There is some art history of early Junkanoo in Cayman, but very, very little information about it. And so it is very much a beads and feathers, jumping, with very little to none sort of homemade creativity. And we're hoping that the conversation that we had with En Masse, with our local community, will help start changing that dialogue. So this is the studio that you're sitting in, and this is one of the exhibitions by an artist called Dreddy, whose work is upstairs as well, that does these very graphic recreations of traditional cultural heritage and architecture. We've also been able to keep the dialogue open with the Museums Association of the Caribbean. Was a recent partner that we had in October. We hosted their annual Museums Association conference, which is now going to Miami. And I know Rosie's sitting on the programming panel with us, and Adriana's here as well. So we've really, I think, also helped MAC kind of see beyond as well, see the possibilities of what this organization can be. And I think as a board member, I'm really excited about those new connections with the Smithsonian and also the African American Museum Association. So again, it shows you from our own small corners of the region, making sure that the conversation stays open. Randy, again, clearly we love taking pictures of Randy. This is an arts festival that we used to run called Art at Governors. So again, when we were in our tiny space, a lot of what we did was outside. This was a 100 artists strong, 3,000 person visited one-day arts festival that we did once a year, that we're currently kind of reframing and looking at moving around the districts. So again, we're actually taking regional work to each of the various districts. Someone's actually going to have to give me a time check. I've been giving everyone else a time check. So again, obviously, we all have gift shops in our museums, but until we were in this facility, we didn't. We weren't able to generate much of our own revenue, and that really is a huge shift in our organization since moving here, establishing revenue-generating arms, including a big events rental department, and doing multiple events just to, again, bring the revenue in. This is one of them. This is actually one of our fundraising galas. We have pretty famous fundraising galas now. They're quite the extravagance. And then, of course, website and social media for us. Caitlin Elphinstone, who I think many of you have been interacting with because she's been helping as our core committee member, is our public engagement manager. And we've been working very hard at looking at social media and the web to open up that access, particularly in our outer islands, obviously overseas, but within our local community as well, getting that resource information to teachers. We're not reinventing the wheel, you guys have all done it, but it is making a real difference in our connectivity with the region. So just briefly to end on, because this will lead us into the lower gallery space. Eventually we'll do that tonight to talk about the current exhibition. But we're currently celebrating 20 years, and we wanted to really talk about, again, the conversations that we're having this week about connectivity, about access. We're still convincing government that we are a viable educational resource, not just about art, but about community, about identity. We have 130 nationalities 160,000 people in the Cayman Islands. So that is a real mix of conversations, and unless we're helping navigate those conversations, it's going to become very contentious. You'll see that we're in many ways a first world country. We have a lot of amazing developments, but at the same time that's come at the cost of some of our own architectural and cultural heritage. So our role primarily is bridging those gaps. It's educating our new community of expatriates coming in to work in the finance and tourism industries about our unique story, working with our artists like Randy Nasaria, Caitlin, Simon, who tell those stories so amazingly well in their work and giving them a platform to do that. And that really fed into this idea of how are we going to celebrate the 20-year anniversary. First, I said to my board, we don't actually have time to stop and celebrate 20 years. We're just too busy. We have a small team. We have to raise about $500,000 a year, which isn't much in some of your institutional budgets, but it's a whole lot of money for us. And so that takes up a lot of time. And we thought, well, this is a great opportunity now to flip the paradigm back into the districts, to get back onto the road, and to take our story now that we've brought people here. They know who we are. They trust us. We do have an incredible... I guess, institutional trust factor in many ways from the community educators, seniors groups, because we're quite nimble and adaptable to what they need, and we'll just make it work. And so we wanted this celebration really to be about a tri-island project. This has taken the place, or taken the model of 3 exhibitions, and the last is the one that we're going to be going into later on. 2 were on site. One was in this room that actually looked at the traditional maritime heritage of the Cayman Islands, because you can't tell the maritime story here or have a dialogue around maritime unless it's rooted in very, beautiful, realistic pictures of catboats and schooners, because you'll scare everybody off. So we started that here with a very accessible, easy exhibition that anyone could connect to, and then took the conversation into much more of a contemporary dialogue about this evolving relationship with the ocean as islanders, and really how that relationship partnership is shifting both in terms of the climate and environmental conditions, but also our continued reliance as an island nation on 90% import of our domestic product. So these are conversations that have been very removed from the way we look at our maritime relationship. It's generally viewed in this very nostalgic, removed sense, and lamented that the men that went to sea that were the strong, hardworking heroes are no more, and our young people have just completely missed that conversation. That's how the older generation would share it, but we're arguing otherwise, and I think we have some very thought-provoking and interesting pieces in the exhibition from about 20 local artists. So this is the project. It's still ongoing. 3 exhibitions. Art on the Road, which is a commitment to go into every single primary school in Cayman in the last 2 or 3 months to talk about maritime history and, again, this contemporary dialogue, but also about the national collection and why it's important to build and own and preserve a national collection for perpetuity. So we'll take a reproduction of one of these images of the catboat. A catboat, by the way, is a small sailing vessel that was one of our primary methods of transportation around the islands for many years, but it was also the small boats that were added to the side of the schooners that then went off to Cuba, Jamaica, fishing out your waters of turtles, one of our darker parts of our history, and then all the way down to Nicaragua and Honduras. So these catboats were really a major part of our economy for a very long time. So we took the story on the road. We went to year 3 in 23 primary schools in Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Little Cayman, who are amazing islands to visit if you do come back. Very, very different from our big urban metropolis of Grand Cayman. And had some incredible feedback from that. You'll see a couple of photographs in just a minute. Then also, we see ourselves as a great platform for enabling community dialogue through groups that might not have the same professional resources or physical resources as the gallery has. So our partners for this exhibition were the National Museum, the Cayman Catboat Club, which is a tiny workshop museum space that we've, again, did our 3rd exhibition in. And then the Seafarers Association, which is literally 70, 80, 90-year-old captain seafarers that went to sea. These are the guys that have the authentic story, and they're passing away. So for us, it's a matter of capturing those stories, enabling our artists and archivists to do the same, and then giving them a platform to actually come and talk about it. And they've been some of the most engaging, enlightening conversations that we've had. And then we just installed a new program that will be annual, which is the Night at the Museums. And that is just an open house night where we're inviting museum partners on the island. There's maybe 5 other heritage-type museums on the island to open their doors in one night and really use our marketing platforms, of which we are very fortunate with local press. We get a lot of coverage to let the public know what they're doing. And teacher training, of course. We are going to be reproducing the National Collection, completely copying this fantastic idea from the National Gallery in London, recreating grand masterpieces that will be driven by the local community themselves. They'll get to choose which works end up in their districts, and take the collection out and literally have it in supermarkets and gas stations, and to really raise awareness of the National Collection and how important it is. Yes.
Is that going to include the pieces that are owned by other institutions?
That's a really good question. We haven't gone out yet to ask those institutions. We'll have to do some negotiating there. And this is the Art on the Road project. So I'm going to jump ahead one. This is the project in action. So again, a lot of these schools have little to no art education still. So this really is, coming in there, allowing these students to get creative and get messy. People are very scared in classrooms in Cayman about paint. And then the idea is to tell the story of that this is the catboat sail, and you'll see when you go upstairs, we did a really interesting project in 2010, which was looking specifically at bringing the traditional cultural heritage of schooners, catboats. Weaving is a very old tradition, very skilled tradition in Cayman, and very functional items, basically. And reimagining those in a contemporary art conversation. And Randy, you were part of that collaboration, and I know there's a sale of yours in the collection as well. And you'll see what inspired these students, because they saw a PowerPoint presentation about the works that the artists had done. Jessica and Kerry were the ones that went out into the districts and really had an amazing time with these students. And this is just some of the feedback. So we got photographs from local schools where the entire corridor of their school was just hung with these amazing catboat paintings. So it really is making that connection. This very quickly is a quick snapshot of the exhibition that you'll see later on. And it shows you again bringing a lot of our audience into this show and explaining that this very large piece here has any connection to their maritime past is what really excites us. And it's been remarkable in that we anticipated the older generation in Cayman to be very anti these kind of works. They came in, they saw the catboats and schooners, and they said, well, we've seen all these catboats and schooners before. We want to go and find out what that means, and had the most incredible and rewarding dialogue with community groups that we least expected. And so that was a great lesson for us as well. These are some of the more traditional pieces, as mentioned. And again, the show that we're doing is a combination of the National Collection and newer works commissioned specifically for the exhibition. This is part of the exhibition that we did for the Catboat Club. This is literally the size of their room. So again, looking at being adaptable in spaces. Outside the back is their workshop. So the one caveat we have with them is to keep the door closed, because the sawdust can be really problematic. Bless you. And then these are some of the amazing seafarers that got into some very cheeky conversations about what went on at port, which we were not expecting. So you have to be very careful when you invite these guys. But it really was, again, well, you can see the exhibition behind them, very traditional exhibition, incredibly rewarding. And this is our night at the museums, going to the National Museum, for they have a Scuba Diving Hall of Fame exhibition in collaboration with the International Scuba Diving Hall of Fame right now. And then this is the Catboat Club as well. So that really is just us in a nutshell. And it's really, I'm going to end on what our new entrance is going to look like, so you can see how you're supposed to enter into our site. Thank you for bearing with us in the back. You've come through the bush, although we do hope to keep both of the entrances because it's much more flexible. But it really has made me think when we've been talking as a committee about the space and time of exhibitions, about curating and about a sense of purpose for what we're doing in the region, and ensuring that we don't become too caught up sometimes in the conversations just within that space, but actually make sure, one, it's accessible to our audience, and we're going to be talking about this in our panel tomorrow, when we're curating, and who are we curating for? What are we curating really, and who are we curating for? Because there are very different communities in our different islands that either relate to contemporary dialogue or not. And keeping that balance, I think, is really needs to be at the heart of who we are, certainly as the National Gallery. And yeah, it's been a great journey. I have an amazing team. We're really seeing young people in Cayman coming back, trained in this profession, which is the first real generation where everyone on our staff, apart from one person, is Caymanian, and the majority all are trained in this specific area. So that's pretty exciting to be part of. And thank you for being here. We're just so excited to welcome you. We are going to go straight out. If you have questions about the space, we can talk about that over wine later on. There will be wine soon. But we do have some amazing... One of the things we wanted to do when we were having the conversation about tilting axis this year as well is say, okay, so we have time for the big panel discussions, and we're here to talk about that theme, but we also want to hear about what people have been doing in between meeting. So we put the call out, and I think 7 of you have responded. We've got 10 minutes, a very tight 10 minutes for each pop-up presentation, but we're going to come back in a minute and kickstart those. So before we do that, because we have a couple of delegates leaving tomorrow, we really wanted to get a group shot today. So I'm going to ask you to head through the gallery, and they are setting up for the event. It does look like it might rain, so we're having to move everything inside. So when you have your wine inside tonight, that's a special treat. Just be careful around the artwork, you all know that. We don't normally do that, but just go straight through, and you'll see the double doors as though you're going out to the construction site, and just gather at the top of the steps. We're going to take the photo in front of the National Gallery sign. Go out, either door, but into the gallery space and straight out to your right-hand side. As soon as we're done, please come back, and we're going to start the next round of presentations.
Round of applause, please.
Oh.